If you're working on startups, you're working on kind of these extraordinary areas, you're kind of in the Olympic athlete version of whatever it is you're trying to do. And then you should have like the level of discipline of an Olympic athlete. You're going to, for sure, grind out long hours. You need to be well rested.
Yeah, that's true.
When I grew up, I would read encyclopedias for fun. I remember doing a calculation of like, oh yeah, I read this fast. I should be able to like read every book in this room, like eventually, like if I wanted to. And the moment that I kind of saw the amount of volume of information on the internet, it was like this crushing moment of like, there's just no way.
I find it interesting that exists.
The Francis Bacon quote of, knowledge is power. Power is probably not the right word. Knowledge is capability. If you know about something, you extend your capabilities of being able to do more things. We need to kind of grow up in a sense and understand the level of impact that we're having, not just on ourselves, but on the rest of the species on this planet. Just because we have current mastery and control over nature today does not give us this right to treat other living beings as if they're worthless.
This was really fun. I'm so excited to have Juan Benet with me today. He is the founder of Protocol Labs, and we have such a rich conversation about the future, Neurotech, his path into crypto, into thinking about knowledge systems and how to document the knowledge that we have in the world to impact scientific progress for the betterment of humanity. Juan, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the Luba Show. I'm so excited to have you.
Thanks for having me.
I want to spend a lot more time talking about what are the problems that you're focused on right now, but I actually want to start more at the beginning. Tell me more about what you were like as a kid. I've heard that you read or inhaled rather encyclopedias, and that led you to your interest in knowledge expansion and human knowledge. Yeah, where did all of those interests come from?
So, yeah, totally right. Like when I grew up, I would read encyclopedias for fun as a kid. I kind of learned to read fairly early. I think like at 3 or so, I started being able to like read, like sound out letters and start reading and so on. I kind of so I grew up with older siblings, and they were kind of more, already learning through school and all of that kind of stuff. And so I, as the baby, kind of like was seeing them grow up and them learning a lot. And so I kind of wanted to be part of that and kind of wanted to understand what was going on. And so I was able to like fairly quickly become super interested in books and so on. And kind of when I realized there was entire stories written on paper, like I really wanted to access that. And so then as soon as I started being able to read, I like started reading various things, and first started with like literature, fiction for kids type stuff, and then pretty quickly found these like illustrated encyclopedias that were incredibly cool, where they had just a bunch of really cool stuff to learn about, but it was all kind of illustrated to give you a perspective. And then from those, I like jumped straight into like just pure text encyclopedias, where think of like the Britannica and stuff like that. And I remember like just reading. I just wanted to learn what everything was, and I was just kind of fascinated by how much stuff there was to kind of think about and learn about. And so I would just remember going like and reading various articles and just kind of trying to make it through the encyclopedia. And then like it just kind of gave me the sense that there was so much that you could kind of find out and discover about the world. And thankfully, a bunch of other people had already done that and written it up for you and packaged it up in like a really easy, fast way to consume it. And it's like that for me was fascinating. And kind of the next jumping off point was probably being able to access the internet. And I got onto the internet early, probably 8
How old were you?
I don't remember exactly, probably 8, 9, 10 maybe. I got to the internet through video games. I used to play a lot of video games, both like consoles and PC games and whatnot. And so I used to play like a fair amount of like online games. And through that, I kind of started exploring the internet. And I remember like the early Netscape browser. This must have been like 95 through 97 or so. So I remember like at least some version of Netscape and like, clicking on a page and like waiting for it to load, and like the little Netscape icon was like animated. and then kind of a new page being kind of
The
opened.
internet as a phone line.
Yeah, and so it was like fascinating for me because I remember going on, I think it was Alta Vista at the time, like I would search for stuff and then I would see like the number of pages of results. And that was both super exciting of like all the stuff that is now at your fingertips, but also daunting because before that, whenever I had found a room full of books, I remember doing a calculation of like, oh yeah, I read this fast. I should be able to like read every book in this room, like eventually, like if I wanted to. And the moment that I kind of saw the amount of volume of information on the internet, it was like this crushing moment of like, there's just no way that I could possibly ever read all of this. And I was like, oh no, like what am I going to do? But
why was it so important to be able to grasp all the information in the world?
I think it's because I guess I became like very keenly aware that knowing about something gives you like it's like super interesting to like all kinds of things are super interesting to know about. And I'm just a very naturally curious person. I'm interested in various phenomena and like want to understand how they work. But also I noticed how the more you learn about something, the more you benefit. Like to me, this the Francis Bacon quote of, knowledge is power is tremendously correct. Power is probably not the right word because it tends to cast it in this, kind of like power differential thing. It's more like knowledge is capability. If you know about something, you extend your capabilities of being able to do more things. And that's not about kind of power structures. It's just entirely about like what you are able to do. Think about it as like, hey, if you don't know how to swim, then you can like drown. But if you know how to swim, then you're good. Yeah. Or if you know how to, think of humanity before knowing about bicycles or whatever, like not being able to like transport faster than like, or not just bicycles, like the wheel in general, just kind of being very limited. And the moment you kind of learn to do this additional thing, you kind of expand your capabilities. And so that was a very formative thing for me. And that translated later on into all of this thinking around knowledge and knowledge systems and kind of like what knowledge actually is. And so one piece is information. I think the last 50 years or so have been described as the information age of being able to kind of digitize everything and distribute it through the internet and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's not about just information and giving access to information. There's a separate layer of this stuff, which I would term as actual knowledge, which is, information that represents some model of reality that is, either correct or not correct. And you have to kind of test it to find out whether things are incorrect, and kind of by process of elimination, finding out what is more likely to be correct. And so this is the entire scientific process. And here I would maybe credit David Deutsch and Karl Popper for kind of pioneering the thinking of kind of knowledge systems and how do we as a species get to know what we know. And so when I think about kind of the scientific process and the technology building process, these are two sides of the same coin where the scientific process is how we as a species get to know what we know, like how do we expand the tree of knowledge? How do we build up more and more of our understanding of reality? And then the technology building process is how do we translate those learnings into concrete capabilities, whether that's just, kind of software technology, meaning different cultural practices or different kind of ways of doing things, different methods, different processes, or actual physical technology where you have some device that you're making, whether it's like, like a lever or a plow or a wheel or a computer or a telescope or, what have you. And so all of that, and each of those technological components, again, whether it's just kind of hardware or software, expand our capability set, which then enable us to do more science, to discover even more. And this process just feeds back on itself. And that's kind of the story of our species. We've been able to do that first in small groups and then on larger and larger scales to kind of flourish broadly across the planet.
Yeah, I love the fact that you're tying all this knowledge to actual capabilities and to doing things in the world, because, there is a lot of information flow and it's very easy to just know a lot of stuff and not do anything with it at all. I'm curious, when you were young and you wanted to know all the things to have different capabilities, what was the dream? Like, what would you want to achieve with those capabilities? And how has that changed?
Yeah, I think, I don't know. I kind of like wanted to learn about everything and kind of try everything. I was just sort of very naturally curious, and I would simultaneously be super interested in like I don't know how lasers work, or how computers work, or how musical instruments work, and how to play a piece of music, or how to or how paintings are made, and how like what like distinguishes the great works of art from others that aren't. And so I just kind of had this very natural curiosity about kind of everything, and I just kind of followed more kind of what I was in the mood for that day, and I just had a very like wide exploration. I also was fascinated by ancient cultures and what they knew at the time, and I just remember being super struck by the fact that when you look at the timelines and you see how many thousands of years some of these cultures lived for, and kind of what progress meant for them at the time, how kind of what they got to understand and be able to do and be able to predict, whether it's kind of key patterns about the weather to be able to do better agriculture, or being able to do basic irrigation systems to be able to grow more and more crops, or like granary systems to be able to like keep their grain and whatnot.
What's the culture that you're most fascinated with?
So I was fascinated with many. Probably, I went through a period in kind of elementary school where I was like super fascinated with like the ancient Egyptian culture, and that was just super cool.
Yeah, I think it's insane how much of it is lost. There are all these different methods and ways of living, and just even thinking about how we have this mindset of like 9 to 5, 7-week, 7-day week, or like 5-day work week. Obviously, that came with industrialization and whatnot. But I bet like so many things were different in, say, Egyptian culture, how they treated the calendar, how they, I don't know, looked at different rituals in life and their representation.
Yeah, so much of our daily life is shaped tremendously by base layer cultural processes that we put in place. Like, how long is the day? How long is the week? How many days per week? How many hours per day? The weekend, holidays, like, some things are kind of derived from other phenomena, like the seasons. The seasons very much impacted when you had to plant stuff versus kind of harvest and whatnot, and kind of like that shaped a lot of our calendars. But yeah, so much of other processes are totally kind of arbitrary, where they could have gone in a totally different direction. Fascinated by in the French Revolution period, they try to kind of get so our current calendaring and time system comes from the ancient Sumerians. And they were kind of like the number 6 was a big deal, and number 60 was a big deal. And
why was number 6 a big deal?
I don't remember the reason why 6 and 60 were important. There must have been a reason. I think it's a different culture that did like number 12 because of the 12 knuckles, because you could count up to 12. And so like our base 10 system just comes from the fact that we have 10 fingers. I mean, it's easy to count to 10 that way. I don't remember why the Sumerians cared about 6 and 60, but we ended up with this kind of calendar based on that. And so, like 60 seconds to a minute, 60 minutes to an hour, and then 24 hours. And like, it's just kind of clunky, like doing the math on it. It feels like using the British system.
Yeah, I guess it's the same as feet,
Yeah, it's just like insane, right?
Yeah.
And so during the French Revolution, they kind of instituted the metric system, and like that one stuck. But they also tried to do decimal time, where you had like, I think 10 hours in a day, and then, each day, like hour could be divided into like.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think how those decisions affect so many different things in life, and how the decisions that we're living upon right now are affecting how we treat our days and weeks and whatever. What, based on your curiosities of different ancient civilizations and these different minute maybe decisions at the time and their impacts on the world, what did you think the ideal way of living and the ideal world creation would look like?
I think that probably, for me, got shaped way later. Just kind of going from what we've done in the past to what we ought to do in the future. that's like a large leap. It kind of this kind of what's known as like David Hume has this perspective of like you can't get an ought from an is, meaning you can look at what has been happening and then from that derive exactly what you ought to do. I don't exactly agree with Hume. Here I would side more with Sam Harris that our scientific understanding of ourselves, of our species, of other species, should give us a base layer sense of morality of what is correct to do. Like you can, like I am not a moral relativist that says that like everything can, according from your frame of reference, can be justified. I think at the end of the day, we're, biological species. We're in connection with the rest of our ecosystems. We have a tremendous impact on the lives of other beings. You have a wide spectrum of benefit and suffering, and our actions can cause either more benefit or more suffering in ourselves and our species and other species. And so I think you can indeed get an ought from an is, but it requires a lot more. Like to really do that, you need a depth of understanding of how all of the systems work and what is the nature of these systems and what are they trying to do and trying to achieve and why. And so you end up with like a very difficult like moral landscapes where, a nature photographer, for example, like documenting the lives of, say, a lion hunting in the savannah, like. They go and like hunt a gazelle or whatever, and like that's terrible for the gazelle. Like you definitely don't want to be the gazelle being hunted by a lion. At the same time, there's been millions of years of evolution that have shaped the lives of these different animals in some kind of biological equilibrium and balance. And the lion also needs to be able to eat in order to survive. And so like the morality there is hard. Like you on the one hand, you want to kind of potentially like save the gazelle. On the other hand, you want to save the lions, and it's like a hard decision-making thing. And like the principle that we've arrived at is like not intervening in that situation of like letting kind of nature take its course. However, a similar sounding but totally different phenomenon is one where you end up in situations of like being able to have medical interventions for a disease, right? So like the natural state of affairs is that some virus or some bacteria are, or some other kind of pathology or like accident or whatever is leading people to have some bad medical condition, or it could be an animal, a person or an animal having a bad medical condition. And we have the capabilities today to be able to greatly improve the outcomes for those people by giving them some medicine or some treatment that helps cure the disease. And there we are stepping in against kind of like the biological equilibrium that was achieved over millions of years. But we think that that's like the right moral thing to do because, kind of dying is bad, suffering is bad, and maybe we can alleviate a lot of that suffering and a lot of that death by kind of intervening. And certainly our species today is just dramatically different than where we were 1,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago or 100,000 years ago. And so we've been beneficiaries of this just tremendous progress. And kind of like our moral landscape needs to kind of understand that and understand our role. And at the same time, we need to kind of grow up in a sense and understand the level of impact that we're having, not just on ourselves, but on the rest of the species on this planet. And we have to kind of take our great power, this is like Spider-Man line, like with great power comes great responsibility. We have to kind of make sure that we are good stewards of the planet and kind of all the other lives in it. And that doesn't mean, like to be clear, I'm a very pro technological progress techno-optimist. So I very strongly agree with increasing our capabilities in terms of energy output and production and so on. But at the same time, we should do so kind of cognizant of the level of well-being that we're causing for ourselves and the other species on the planet, right? Like just because we have current mastery and control over nature today does not give us this kind of right to treat other living beings as if they're worthless. Instead, like we should be careful in how we treat many other species. And I say this as like somebody who, I definitely like, I'm like, I'm like an omnivore. I eat like both plants and animals, and these are other lives. But for example, I would strongly side with farming practices that lead to a much higher quality of life for the animals that are being bred for livestock versus kind of like the extreme factory farming situation that probably has an enormous amount of suffering, right? And so I take into account all of this kind of thinking, and I come at it with a perspective of like trying to deeply understand how we got where we are, what have been the kind of hundreds of millions of years of evolution that got us here. When did our like different lines of species kind of break off, and what is the different degree of capability that all these different forms of life have for fulfillment and suffering, right? So, for example, like a mammal with like an advanced nervous system is going to be able to access a type of suffering and a type of fulfillment that is just very different than what, say, a plant needs, right? Like a plant needs a very different type of set of conditions for well-being and kind of balance with its ecosystem. And so there's just like a totally different way that you should kind of approach both of those. And the same goes for humans. Like the things that are going to lead to really great flourishing and well-being for humans globally just look qualitatively very different than what's going to be good for, say, a mouse in the savannah or something, or a plant in the rainforest or something like that.
So do you think that people who are responsible for creating different types of technological and scientific and health problems right now have a good sets of principles for how to make those decisions and to understand which position and perspective they should take?
Yeah, it's a great question. So what I would say, so I'll give you the quick answer and then I give a longer answer. So the quick answer is yes. I think for the most part, most of the people that I've ever met and read from in a range of the scientific fields involved, or like the conservation fields, tend to approach their thinking and their decisions with a super deep, well-considered perspective that is very informed with like as wide of a swath of information as they have access to. That's not always been the case. And in fact, kind of like there are some like very clear examples in history of people that kind of abuse their knowledge. Like there's at least one case of one scientist who did like this terrible stuff where like he's a person who kind of tried to defend putting lead in gasoline and tried to defend CFCs, which then caused the hole in the atmosphere. And
it's like he obviously knows that it's bad, but he was still trying. Okay,
totally,
yeah,
totally, right. Like I can't claim to know what was in his head, but it's the actions speak very loudly, and it's pretty clear that I think he understood what he was doing. And so there's clearly some bad people that abuse power.
So it's kind of like, is your intention good having the information that you have at the moment? Obviously, looking back at history, we might have more information and be like, well, that decision was bad because now we know more that, I don't know, like opioids are actually bad, but in like the 20th, we were heavily using them for surgeries. So that's
totally. So there's mistakes of lack of understanding, which are kind of more understandable. It doesn't mean it's good. It's just kind of, that's a very different level of harm than if somebody is knowingly doing something really bad, right? Those should be treated very differently, and they are in our society. We treat those two kind of cases quite differently. But there's also something that I think very pernicious today, which is we live in a world where the science tends to be broadly misunderstood and misappreciated, and just
how did it happen?
This is a hard social question. I think it happened through the undermining of kind of authority figures in media. So like if you wind the clock back to, say, the 60s and 70s, there was kind of like a lot more respect for, actually 50s and 60s, there was a lot more respect for authority figures. And as somebody who strongly believes in scientific principles of, trusting no one's word for it and like trying to figure it out for yourself, and strongly autodidact and so on, I strongly kind of agree with not just trusting authority figures for authority's sake, but instead deeply understanding what they're saying and trying to connect that to what you know and so on. However, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and beyond, there was just this progressive erosion of trust that happened, where now there's just kind of suspicion towards authority figures of any sort, and not from a perspective of well-considered alternatives, but rather from just honestly like an ignorant perspective that we're like people just don't know any better and distrust people that do know better.
Yeah.
And like, that's just a terrible position to be in. I think that's changing. I do think that the advent of social media, which in some respects gives credence to a lot of people who are able to just broadly broadcast stuff, is also leading to a lot more knowledge being disseminated and a lot more people leveling up their understanding. A lot of people from more academic orientation or from these kind of like authority-oriented landscapes worry about this kind of stuff because, at least in the past, it used to work that you would have to develop deep expertise in something before you're able to speak to it. And instead now, because of the internet and social media, anyone can say anything about anything.
And then it's about discernment. Can you actually tell
exactly.
truth?
And I think like the key is that I do think that most like in higher and higher numbers every year, more and more people are developing that level of discernment and ability to understand what is correct and not correct. We're not yet doing great. I think it could be dramatically better. But it is much better than I think a lot of people give it credit for. And you can see it in the views for really deep topics. So like you can go to, channels like 3.1 Brown, which is like this amazing math explainer, and it has millions of views for like really deep niche mathematical topics that show you there's now millions of people learning that material. And so that is like just way stronger than it was, 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And so I do think that just the internet making all this information available has enabled people globally to kind of level up their understanding and level up their discernment. That's not to say that some bad memes and kind of bad perspectives are also getting propagated and also kind of increasing in numbers, right? Kind of like the flat earther thing is, grew thanks to the internet. But at the same time, I think many more people globally got to understand why we know that the planet is round, why, what is kind of like the background behind that, what are the experiments that you can do to run, that you can run to like figure this out for yourself, and so on. And so I think like in general, we have like this net positive, even though kind of the internet has been used to kind of propagate bad memes too.
So you've evolved your own work to now spend time exactly on this, promoting science, making science cool again, funding different projects that otherwise wouldn't be able to be funded with traditional capital. I want to split this into two. One, understanding how you've evolved your career from working just in crypto on Filecoin, then into Protocol Labs, and to, what are the main problems that you're focused on right now?
Yeah, and so maybe I would start a little bit earlier. The kind of like this deep interest in knowledge and this kind of a quest for knowledge, and led me down a path of trying to understand concretely what knowledge actually is.
What is knowledge?
Which surprisingly like you would think
it's
like
a difficult question.
easy to reason about, but it's like surprisingly difficult. I'll give you like one framing and kind of I'll punt the rest of the explanation to David Deutsch specifically, because I think he does a phenomenal job in a book called
What's your favorite book of
The Beginning of Infinity? I think is extremely good. And I think The Fabric of Reality also does a great job. But I think both of those together give you a kind of like very accessible, well-popularized description of what knowledge is, with good grounding from many different perspectives in scientific understanding, and in particular, a kind of computer science-oriented perspective, which I think is a key piece here. So maybe I'll kind of like, I'll try this explanation, and I don't know if it's going to work, but the way I see it is there have been three major knowledge systems developed in our planet so far. The first major knowledge system is the genetic knowledge system. So this is very low-level biological structures figured out a way to encode information about themselves in a strand of information. So this is genetic sequences like DNA and RNA coding for proteins and for assemblages of proteins to produce a cell. And the evolutionary process yielded this pressure for these systems to refine themselves over time and become more and more accurate representations of reality. Meaning there was this deep selection pressure for representations that correctly coded for correct proteins, but not just correct proteins, protein assemblages and sets of them that would perform better than others. And so you had this very kind of strong process for refining information strands that represented like pieces of biological material that had to do well in the environment. So that means that those genetic sequences learned to encode some information about their environment and what is successful in their environment. And that's a form of knowledge. It's kind of like a program that is run. It's literally from a computer science perspective, it's a set of instructions that get computed on by a little computer, which is kind of like the ribosome and like the ability to like assemble like proteins and whatnot, and are form part of this like larger system that then performs better if it is more accurately representing the world around itself, and performs worse if it makes mistakes. And so that is kind of like the first knowledge system of being able to encode this kind of information about the environment in itself.
So just to translate it so that I make sure I understand it, it's basically the world started with some inputs of different sequences of protein and their quantity, and then it would go out into the world and essentially run like an A/B test for how that system is performing against the environment. And if something was off, then it would readjust itself. So it's like a self-readjusting system that would eventually create evolution.
Well, so I would say even like the world didn't start with that, because like those components got assembled out of this kind of selection pressure. So there's kind of like a process that happened before of just we still don't fully understand how exactly it developed, but as best as we can tell, very early cells were able to form that created like a slightly different environment relative to like the rest of the kind of ocean. And in those environments, you had these conditions for those environments to kind of self-replicate and propagate. And there's an open question as to whether that started with like nucleic acids coding for proteins, or there was some other representation first. I think now, and you know, other evolutionary biologists would know way more what like the kind of current scientific consensus is. But it's all of this to mean, at some point in the early history of life development, we ended up with what is now known as like the core biological machinery of life, which is some nucleic acid that represents the strand of information that represents all of the components that are going to be built, and a set of proteins that kind of form the kind of like Lego building blocks that produce the machinery of a cell. And all of the biological processes of a cell, including being able to kind of find its own food and metabolize that food and kind of replicate itself and so on, are all encoded in this genetic strand.
Got it.
And once you have a genetic strand and being able to expose it to mutation over time, which kind of introduces some variants and replication errors and kind of like copying, then this replicator process gives you this selection pressure over time for finding those individuals that are going to more correctly match the environment. And so it's a very small pressure, but over millions of years, it has a tremendous effect of selecting for things that are going to be much more effective than others. This is kind of the survival of the fittest sort of perspective applied to just like the information strands. And so it's like one knowledge system. It's like encoding information about the environment in itself and making it computable.
I just wanted to give it another shot. It's basically just the genetics code that is available to us that works a very specific way. And that's the first layer of the knowledge system.
And so over time, we then built, our living life tree, in a sense, ended up building a second knowledge system like this. And that was on top of kind of nervous system. So the nervous system is a set of specialized cells, which are like the neurons, which are able to process information. And this is information of a different type. So this is not genetic sequences, but is instead information represented as action potentials on, which is kind of like a neuron pumping ions and then like propagating an electrical signal. And so these systems were able to initially do some very basic wiring to be able to introduce motor control on like very, very simple forms of life. So there are like these extremely simple forms of life that have, tens or hundreds of neurons that are able to kind of like move around and kind of sense their environment. And so you have like this very basic wiring. And so these neurons served initially as like kind of like electrical switches in a sense of being able to translate some information about the environment into decision making, like being able to kind of wiggle a tail to be able to like follow one path and kind of go towards the food or away from predators or things like that. So like very, very basic kind of like robotics type information processing. And that information processing over time, again, subject to selection and evolution, became more and more and more sophisticated, and the neural systems became larger and larger and larger to the point where you had, larger animals, like including like something as to us small but like large relative to other things, like a fly or a mouse, that are extremely sophisticated neural systems that are able to now sense a lot about the environment, create kind of a sense of self, a sense of being able to navigate the landscape, especially like mammals have all kinds of social interactions, and so they need to represent some internal state about themselves and being able to relate to other animals, and then be able to like make decisions together, or kind of like you have all this social activity, like some being friendly with each other, some like fighting or whatever, and all of that comes from a very sophisticated set of constraints that these animals have to navigate, and so their neural systems have to adapt to that much more complex environment. And that system became able to learn about the world by observation. So like that kind of much more advanced brain systems were able to build representations of the world around themselves and build ways of understanding what's going on. And so that means like generating concepts inside of like the neural tissue of what is happening, to be able to understand what's going on, to then be able to make better decisions and be able to better plan, or like find food and find each other and all of this kind of, or like run away from predators and whatnot in a much more like sophisticated environment, to the point where you have examples of like transfer learning where you can see they do this in birds, for example. Like they'll have a bird watch another bird that is able to use a tool, and then that bird now like can acquire that knowledge by being able to observe somebody else, another bird doing it. And so you have a way of like transferring a concept from kind of like understanding and reasoning what's going on, and from observation being able to generate the required knowledge representation in its brain of what's going on. Eventually, we figured out as how to turn that knowledge into transferable packages. So that means animals at some point developed the ability to talk to each other and have like very early versions of communication. And that led to like more and more and more sophisticated patterns, to the point where you eventually ended up with very sophisticated languages. It's unclear exactly where those began. Like there's open questions as to how sophisticated the languages of dolphins are, or where in like the primate line that began. Do other primates have sophisticated language, or is it very basic? But at some point, humans definitely developed, or like early hominids developed very advanced forms of language that were able to transfer like very deep representations about the world and themselves and what's going on, and like social structures. And that is like this second, version of knowledge that not only can we refine through our own lived experience, but we can also start transferring to each other, meaning we can describe what's going on to somebody else. We can kind of explain some process and put it into speech. And eventually we figured out how to build like knowledge tools, being able to write down, like the moment that we got writing, which is kind of the ability of transferring some knowledge representation that would be in our heads or in our speech, and instead encode it in a permanent or semi-permanent medium, so that then you have this asynchrony of like, now I can like take my speech and put it into a tablet and then give it to you or give it to somebody else or send it.
And that's the third knowledge layer.
That's all still the second.
Oh, that's still the second. Okay.
Also different aspects of this like second layer, which is kind of knowledge encoded in neural
taking
patterns.
inputs, encoding it, and then transferring it from one species to another or within the species.
Exactly. So the first layer is just kind of genetic information and genetic knowledge. The second one is
representation
mimetic,
of knowledge.
kind of like information and knowledge represented in neural systems, which are called named memes. So memes and mimetic knowledge comes from that. And the third one is the digital one. So the digital one meaning being able to create digital computers that are able to encode representations of reality and being able to transfer them. So this is kind of like early kind of digital computers being able to kind of represent documents and information, and then later like the internet and being able to move around packets of information, and eventually artificial neural nets that are able to kind of learn from that environment and learn representations of reality and like complex programs and whatnot. So we're in the process of creating the third major kind of layer of knowledge. And so through all of this, even though knowledge is so fundamental to what we do and fundamental to ourselves and kind of what it means to be human, we don't have a way of articulating what knowledge we actually know. Like we have encyclopedias and we have kind of compendiums of information, but we don't have a good systematic way of describing what knowledge do we actually know to be true and how and what evidence do we have behind it. We have very kind of amorphous processes for this. We don't have like a very robust way of, we don't have like a website, for example, for every piece of knowledge that we have and what evidence is behind that, or how might you learn that as quickly as possible. And so like I kind of became very interested in this question of how could you clearly represent knowledge itself and both, the scientific process that is expanding what we know and kind of if you were to like actually visualize what is the tree of knowledge that we know and how are we expanding it? And then separately, how are we translating that knowledge into concrete, capability expansion? So pieces of technology or products that kind of like broadly diffuse that knowledge.
When did you clarify this specific mission for yourself, that this exact definition of what you care about with respect to knowledge is what you're in pursuit of?
Yeah, probably. This became, I think, very crisp for me in like late college. So this would have been like 2008, 2010, and 2012. And it kind of became very clear that this is kind of a very fundamental kind of layer of our existence that is not well articulated. And I think still isn't. In fact, even though we have major scale systems and processes for how do we learn new things, so this is the scientific process, or how do we teach a lot of our existing bodies of knowledge. So this means schools and textbooks and kind of information repositories, both kind of in libraries or in online. We still don't have a good way of assessing what knowledge do we actually have as a species, and what is the what is the knowledge content of a particular brain, right? So what exactly do you know? What do I know? How do we know that? What is the evidence that we have?
But also creating a system for what would be a good representation of what evidence means, what knowledge, like how do you represent the knowledge? How do you, do you ask people who are putting the knowledge down about the experiments, for example, that they ran to come to a conclusion? I guess that's evidence to come to a conclusion that this knowledge is true. And then I think like culturally, there is probably going to be different variances and nuances for how people interpret it. So it's like, is our interpretive mechanism the same from culture to culture? That sounds, I'm like mind blown just listening to that. I'm like, how do you fix that?
And it's like, hard questions. And I think we have rudimentary versions of this stuff. So for example, we have, kind of like the crudest version of this is the scientific citation graph of showing this paper citing this other paper. And so like they're sort of building on each other. But ideally what you want to know is every single claim, every single piece of evidence that is contributing to a claim or disproving a claim
follows the same methodology, probably, right?
You would want this like deep graph of all of the deep representation of all of our knowledge, and then you would want to be able to relate that graph to explanations of this knowledge to be able to access it. And so, like if you want to learn something like a branch
This
of
really
math.
reminds me of Remember Rome Research and like
Yes.
the
Yeah.
bidirectional linking and graphing.
Yep. Yeah. So the beginning of the internet is kind of deeply intertwined with similar perspectives of trying to figure out what we know. So the Memex was an early vision of what the kind of pioneered hypertext on the internet. This was from Vannevar Bush in like the late 30s or 40s. It was a description of like it was kind of like a visionary paper describing, how you could use early computers to digitize. This must have been 40s, must have been late 40s actually. How do you digitize like pieces of text, and like how do you create like a global compendium of all of the books and all of the pieces of information?
The Zettelkasten system came from something along those lines
Which
too.
one?
The system where you write down on a piece of paper your piece of knowledge and then link it to another pin card that represents that piece of knowledge. I think it's called Zettelkasten or something along those lines.
I don't know about it.
Sorry, continue.
Yeah, no, it's so like there were like these perspectives about, how could you trace your journey through all of these writings
discoveries
and how you keep your own notes and how you make your own notes accessible. And this was like early versions of what later on became hypertext and like precursors of the web and precursors of the internet and so on.
So you basically got very interested in this topic of how do you trace human knowledge and how do you represent it on the internet or elsewhere around college years.
And how do you kind of accelerate the process of discovery? So how can you accelerate the scientific process to be able to know more faster? Because if you look at history, the more we know and the faster we can know it, the better all of our human experience has become. Like, the more we're able to translate into better methods for making shelter and for better methods for curing diseases, or like we had the knowledge of how to make a microscope. We had the knowledge of how to like clean and make lenses and do kind of like glass-based lenses, and then that led to the microscope, and the microscope led to like our very direct observation that there were like a bunch of little things all over the place, and what are these things? And that categorization of trying to understand what are these like little things that we can now see led to understanding germ theory and our understanding of like bacteria and viruses and so on. And that led to sanitation. And so like, in the late 19th century, you get, things like pasteurization and kind of like washing hands and so on. And all of that is downstream of people realizing that like there was all of these like little, kind of infectious microorganisms that were only visible and understandable once you figured out the knowledge required for a microscope, right? And so if we can just speed up the rate of scientific discovery and the rate of invention and the rate of diffusing those inventions into society so that many more people can access them, then like just our living conditions get dramatically better broadly. And so if we can kind of just make more progress faster, then everyone's kind of living conditions automatically start getting better and better and better. You do have to make sure that there's like broad access to these, and you do need like a large scale kind of global system for how do you kind of diffuse the knowledge and diffuse the capabilities, and that's kind of like what modern economies are kind of solving. And so I kind of like became kind of very interested in both articulating what actually is the tree of knowledge. How do we speed it up? Speed up like the building of the tree, and how do we speed up the translation of that knowledge into concrete inventions and products that could kind of embody that knowledge and increase your capabilities.
I love how now hearing very clearly what is the mission that you're on or what is the topic that you so deeply care about, there is a very clear through line for how you've tried tackling this problem with Athena first, then Filecoin, and then now Protocol Labs. Tell me more about what does Protocol Labs represent right now, and how are you specifically working on solving this problem?
Yeah, so kind of the inception of Protocol Labs happened in kind of like 2013, 2014. I wanted to, but like I was kind of a student of history and had seen that like if you, in order to do a lot of R&D and to do it at scale, you need a lot of capital, meaning you need to be able to organize not just like thousands of people, but like hundreds of thousands of people at scale, just because R&D is difficult and expensive to do. And so I became keenly aware of the Silicon Valley story of how if you build a technology company and you can create a strong product that has a very large cash flow, you can then fund the development of a lot of other R&D. I was primarily inspired by the kind of great technology companies of the 20th century. So this means things like Bell and Bell Labs. And so like Bell is like the telephony company, and they had like Bell Labs, which was like this R&D outfit that kind of pioneered things like information theory and like solar cells lasers and transistors. And like it just kind of was an incredibly innovative environment that was able to produce so much. And they did it at a scale, like they did kind of the highest concentration and highest, most scalable R&D single organization that has been built in history. I think like to this day, I don't think any organization really matches what Bell Labs had been able to do.
Is it still around?
So no, not exactly. So there is still an entity and an organization that kind of like claims the lineage. But the Bell Labs of its heyday is no longer around, and kind of tragically fell apart because Bell itself was broken up. Bell had this natural monopoly that was kind of built into law, and eventually that got challenged and removed, and then that kind of came at a time in a slump within Bell Labs history, and Bell Labs couldn't actually recover. And at the same time, you also had the Silicon Valley growing and overtaking, and Silicon Valley kind of drained a lot of the talent away from what would have otherwise kind of been Bell Labs' growth.
So at some point in college, you were like, hey, I care about this knowledge problem, and I need a lot of capital.
I need to create an institution that is able to kind of do something economically really valuable for the world, such that we have the ability to form a lot of capital to orient it towards
to create something similar to Bell Labs.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of the path that I started on. And the first product and technology that I was pursuing was building IPFS and Filecoin. And so these are two related technologies in distributed systems. And so those became kind of like the first major products that I could build to then kind of create some economic cash flow for Protocol Labs to be able to kind of do this like larger, longer term, broad R&D vision.
How did you have so much conviction that Filecoin, because Filecoin did end up being very successful, which I'm sure helped you fund Protocol Labs and its efforts. How did you have the conviction that this is going to make money? Because crypto was pretty early back then.
Yeah, that's a whole other story. So and fairly orthogonal to kind of what Protocol Labs is now. But one of the things I've been able to do over time is kind of understand certain areas of technology and try to think through when are they going to become. Let me try another version. So like. One of the things I do, I tend to look at a lot of different fields and kind of update myself on what are the major breakthroughs, what's happening in that field, what is the potential promise, like the range of applications, what are the fundamental scientific discoveries, what are the bottlenecks. And so I kind of like I kind of keep tabs on a range of fields and kind of what the progress is. And cryptocurrency was one of these ideas that had been explored before Bitcoin. So, the first cryptocurrencies were not exactly named cryptocurrencies, but the vision for it kind of got shaped in the 80s, 90s through things like the Agoric papers and like the cypherpunk movement and so on. And like things like, DigiCash and like PayPal, the first version of the PayPal product that Confinity built. This was like the Peter Thiel, Max Levchin first part of PayPal. Had a cryptocurrency in it.
Yeah. And so I actually even remember when I was back, a kid in Belarus, my dad had digital wallets across, I think like Yandex.ru or something along those lines.
Probably that came a lot. I think that's probably a lot later. That was probably like the post Bitcoin.
No, it was late 90s, early 2000s.
Oh, late 90s. There was already like digital
exactly.
money?
Yeah,
Oh,
back
cool.
in like
That's
Belarus,
awesome.
Russia, there was digital wallets, and I remember with my dad like uploading some money to that digital
Yeah.
wallet, and it would convert it to a
But was
currency.
it like fiat currency or was it a different
No,
currency?
it was a different currency.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah,
That's
I don't
super
remember
cool.
exactly what it was, but I remember when I discovered cryptocurrency, I was like, what is the difference between this new crypto thing and like the digital wallet money that we
And
had?
then one of the biggest and widely distributed forms of first digital currency was WoW gold, like World of Warcraft gold.
Oh, that's so cool.
So
Okay.
because a lot of people played that, like millions of people played that game, and there was like an economic activity that you could do.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. So all of these, so that like early history and like the first wave of peer-to-peer systems and like the web and so on showed that eventually you would have digital forms of money. And Bitcoin was the first very successful version of these. So even though there had been a number of attempts before, what Bitcoin really succeeded at is solving this large-scale long-term adoption problem of how do you build a large enough currency that a lot of people started using and believing in, and that kind of shaped the beginning of the modern crypto industry, like the modern cryptocurrency industry. And so at the time, like in kind of, I actually happened to see Bitcoin fairly early, like probably 2009, 2010. And at the time, it seemed like yet another project like this, and it was not clear that it was going to work. It seemed like it wasn't clear to me why it would succeed. I remember mining some amount of it in like a computer cluster in university.
And then did you keep your keys?
No, I think like we like mined a bunch of it and like I forgot about it, like whatever. Like I don't even remember how much it was. Who knows? But at the time, it was just kind of not clear that it was going to succeed. And I think a lot of us really underestimated Bitcoin's potential. And kind of by 2011, 2012, it started really showing strong signs of success, where now a lot of people were starting to use it and talking about it and building wallets for it and ways of transacting in it and so on. And so kind of by 2012, 2013, it was clear that like this was a major potential. And around that time, as I kind of like re-looked at Bitcoin and kind of try to understand, to kind of get deeper into its process, I kind of found like this core idea of the mining process of Bitcoin extremely interesting. So the mining process of Bitcoin is this ability of allocating some portion of the currency to funding a service that the network is going to run. In Bitcoin's case, it's just the hashing power that secures the Bitcoin blockchain. It also serves as an exchange in a sense, in that you can walk up to the network with a computer and effectively like acquire Bitcoin by providing your computing power to the network. And so that gives you a way of bootstrapping the entire system and bootstrapping access to the currency. But what was really bothersome to me is that the computing process that Bitcoin used was effectively this useless piece of work that, though it's securing the blockchain, it's not doing anything more useful beyond that. Like it's just kind of hash rate power that's wasted. And it seemed very clear to me that you could do something actually useful with that process, that you could weave a more useful process into the consensus. And that's kind of where Filecoin came from. So it came from me wanting two things. One, a currency that I could use with IPFS to have a market, to be able to like pay people for storing data. And then second, a process, a like crypto mining process to be able to weave into the block reward function that would do something actually useful. And that's kind of where Filecoin came from. In terms of you asked me about kind of conviction and kind of where that came from. A lot of it comes down to thinking very deeply about the systems, thinking about the competitive landscape, thinking about why people use things, and then very clearly seeing that if you kind of fulfill a set of product requirements and you're able to do it at cost or ideally like cheaper than the alternatives, then you have a product to sell. And so that kind of gave me a strong sense that we could build something really compelling here that could, in IPFS's case, it was about a combination of feature sets that didn't really exist before. There were precursors that were similar in some regards, but not quite in the combination that IPFS offered. And so being able to do portable peer-to-peer websites was just not something that like was available before. And so that was like really fundamental to the success of IPFS. And then separately for Filecoin, it was this kind of very strong mining process that attached to a currency that was able to kind of amass massive scale hardware to be able to devote to this to the storage network. And so that to me kind of gave me a lot of conviction, even just in paper, let alone once we had code and product and people started using it and so on.
And the storage piece of it, is it tied to the knowledge base? Like, were the pieces of information that people were storing kind of in hope that this would lead to also humanity's information storage for that bigger mission of knowledge and evidence-based learning?
Yeah, it's a great question. So for a set of us in the community, yes, although these systems are fairly separate, meaning whenever you're building a product or a computing system, you want to try and make it as useful as possible in as wide of a range of use cases as possible. So like if you make it too general, then it might not quite fit enough of a use case. But if you make it too specific, then maybe it's too narrow. And so both IPFS and Filecoin are broadly information systems. So they're able to store, address, and transfer any kind of information. Now a subset of the community really cares about scientific progress, the storage of really valuable information that is culturally very significant. A lot of the early IPFS community came from kind of like open access science communities that really cared about being able to create peer-to-peer versions of scientific journals and being able to have open access scientific papers and data, and kind of like having a peer-to-peer distribution of data. Especially scientific data can be very big and expensive to move around, and if you use peer-to-peer, then you can kind of split the cost between everybody. And then that also translated into the Filecoin community, where a large segment of the Filecoin community is deeply focused on creating publicly verifiable and publicly accessible compendiums of knowledge and information that all of humanity really cares about, both scientific data, but also culturally significant data. So this might be kind of like all of the records of books that are like already out of copyright, like libraries worth of stuff. Like the Internet Archive is a close partner of the Filecoin community, where we just want to be able to generate like large replicas of all these like really valuable long-term cultural artifacts. And so yeah, it's kind of like a very important part of the community, but it's not the whole story. Meaning like you should also be able to use these systems to store and distribute application data and personal data or your organization's data and so on.
So you created Filecoin. Filecoin was as successful as you wanted it to be, or maybe more successful, maybe less successful. But basically, baseline, it was a successful product. And so how did that lead
and so
to...
Filecoin is on a growth trajectory and will have like a pretty successful long-term outlook. A lot of us are working on it very strongly. It's one of these things where crypto networks turn out to be much longer projects than people expected. So a lot of Silicon Valley type products and companies can very quickly form, build, and grow and kind of like either succeed or not. Crypto networks are just like a different beast, and they take a lot longer to produce super high quality product experiences, and they're really big in nature. And so there's just a lot to Filecoin's like growth that is yet to come. Yeah.
And I think that's true for a lot of innovation too. We kind of think that, AI was an overnight success, or the internet was an overnight success.
Yeah, an overnight success
so
since
much,
the 1960s.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so Filecoin, and tell me more about how that evolved into more of the mission that we're talking about with knowledge storage and systems.
So when I started Protocol Labs, I kind of built an organization that kind of had this strong DNA of being able to do this long-term R&D. And I wanted to be able to, and so because we started with IPFS and then Filecoin, and then we built other projects and protocols like Lip2P and a number of other systems, we already had this kind of DNA of building many possible products. And over time, I became kind of aware that in this period, so like early 21st century, the traditional Bell Labs approach of building one large corporation doesn't quite work anymore.
How so?
So the latest attempts to do this include things like Alphabet. So Google So I would say Alphabet is maybe the best attempt at it. There are others, but I'll kind of use it as an example. Alphabet was the attempt of taking the Google cash flow, meaning the ad-based revenue idea. I think Alphabet has been the latest, most successful attempt at trying to do this, where Google historically already had in its DNA being able to try a lot of different products. So it was not just Google Search, but it also created Gmail and acquired a range of companies like the stuff that became Google Docs and YouTube and so on. So already Google as a company had this perspective of trying many different products. And then when Larry, Sergey, and Sundar and others created Alphabet, that kind of leveled up the organization into being able to reach for other kinds of R&D that were very far away from what Google traditionally did. And so this is when things like Waymo became possible. Waymo was already a project that had started as part of like what became X later on and was already associated with Google. But they also could do things like Verily and many other kind of bets that were outside of the traditional Google wheelhouse. And as part of that, they kind of separated X into its own lab, R&D lab, and so on. But in practice, it hasn't been that successful, even though it's been very expensive to operate. Like if you add up all of the cost structure of all of Alphabet, like all the other bets, it's quite a lot of money that has gone into those organizations, and they haven't yet succeeded in productionizing a ton of that R&D. In that same period, there was a different attempt at doing this, which is, or not even an attempt at doing this, just kind of a different process. YC, which started in kind of around, I don't remember the exact date, but like 2006, 2008, maybe even earlier.
I think maybe 2004 or so.
2004, yeah. Was that the first class? So like fairly, mid 2000s. By the time that Alphabet kind of started, YC had been funding, tens of companies at a time. And in the time between Alphabet and now, YC has been able to fund many thousands of companies and partner with, probably over 5,000, close to 10,000 founders across a wide variety of possible fields. And many of those ended up being quite successful bets. And YC did this with a small fraction of the capital that Alphabet did. And so it showed me that, like, if your goal is to kind of greatly accelerate R&D broadly across a lot of different fields, the traditional Silicon Valley approach, which is to build one large organization, one large company, is no longer the best way. That instead, if you create a structure to partner with founding teams of various different sorts across a wide swath, you can greatly accelerate hundreds or thousands of different teams operating across the entire R&D landscape. And so once I realized that, I changed the trajectory of Protocol Labs from
When did you realize it?
I kind of realized it in 2019, 20 or so. 2009. Like this kind of insight takes a while for you to realize, even though like it's kind of hard to place because probably the insights for it were brewing, but me really doing the crisp analysis and putting numbers into it probably happened in 1920. And that I have like the slide that I have used in talks before where I compare Alphabet and YC and kind of what the nature of the two. It just kind of taught me that if I really wanted to do this long-term R&D acceleration, I needed to approach it as a network as opposed to building a single kind of large company. And so I veered the trajectory of PL to turn into this, what I call an innovation network. So it's not an innovation company, it's an innovation network that creates organizational structures to support a number of different teams across the R&D pipeline, doing all kinds of R&D across many different fields. And part of what we bring to the table is capital. Part of what we bring is a lot of talent, kind of a connective tissue between all of the organizations, many different ways of helping, but it's kind of like tuned very differently. So it doesn't have like a hard boundary. It's highly collaborative. it's like a network native type of organization.
Tell me a bit more about how it's different from a VC fund, because obviously, like YC started as an accelerator that gave you capital. They have a program, but then you could argue that traditional VC fund structure tries to support certain traditional VC fund structures tries to support you with talent or networks as a differentiator. Now, especially that it's so competitive, how do you see PL and its structure different from like a traditional VC fund?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the way that I would say is qualitatively different in a few ways. One piece is PL has a VC side to it. And so we have a set of venture funds that do the very crisp and concrete venture capital approach of investing in specific types of stages in a particular way, particular size rounds, and kind of like fits that part. Like we create a venture capital product for a set of founders and a set of LPs, but it's a piece of the larger network. Other stuff that we do that say most VCs don't do is we also deploy capital into very early stage science and invention, often before there are any companies, or often in projects that have yet to kind of like go through the translation process to identify what will be the concrete.
What's an example of a project
models.
like that that's like too early to be a company?
So we funded a ton of work in cryptography and like early stuff that led into zero knowledge proofs development. We've done a lot of funding in the DeSci space. We've done a lot of funding in across the whiteboard. In Neurotech. So we've funded a number of like just effectively science projects and that are trying to do like and a set of organizations that are called FROs, focused research organizations, that are doing kind of more academic technology building or invention work, often before there is a company. And so this stuff that is like just outside of the realm of possibility of a VC. And so like, and we keep this work very separate from our venture side. So like our venture funds are like a separate part. This is more like the grant making part. And so kind of our long-term business models to be able to start and invest in companies that produce a very strong cash flow. And then we take part of that cash flow to fund this very early part of the process to be able to do long-term R&D.
So there is the VC arm, there is the early research projects that you find to be very important for humanity arm. There is probably some
and it's also network forming. So we create a bunch of kind of connective tissue across this whole R&D pipeline that is maybe closer to what, like I think YC does a version of this, and say large tech companies do a version of this, where you create shared culture, shared information processes, like a kind of way of people across the entire network being able to help each other or like solve problems together. That kind of connective tissue. We do a lot more of that than say most kind of groups either in venture or in grant making ever do.
Right, and you either support or do a lot of in-person events yourself too. That probably serves as a connective tissue too. How do you pick problems that are most important to work on for humanity, for the progress of humanity? Is PL very opinionated about the types of verticals you invest in, or is it just like, okay, this seems interesting, kind of like a coin toss-up, might be good, might not be good?
So we are very opinionated. So we currently have 4 focus areas. And part of these came from where we grew organically. So that means like very pragmatically taking a position based on what we've done so far that has been successful. And so our first 2 focus areas are related to crypto. The first one is around Web3 and digital human rights. So this means building secure communications infrastructure and secure large-scale transaction platforms. So this means, so we have 4 focus areas. The first 2 relate to crypto, and this is kind of where we just have like a very large presence. The first one is in Web3 and securing the internet and establishing digital human rights. So this means secure communications infrastructure, secure publishing systems, secure transaction systems. So this is projects like IPFS and Filecoin and Ethereum and lots of different kinds of blockchains, projects like Blue Sky, just anything that relates to stronger, more decentralized foundations for the internet. The second focus area is what we call upgrading economies and governance systems. And so this is more the kind of cryptocurrency side of the crypto world. This is things that use game theory and smart contracts and mechanism design to build new economic primitives that can kind of improve global economies or create like a digital internet economy. This includes projects, like Bitcoin, projects like stablecoins, DeFi, DeSci, applications of DePIN that kind of build kind of better production infrastructure. So like projects like Glow, which is kind of our applying DePIN to growing solar energy build-outs. This includes kind of the new pop-ups or new cities kind of movement or network states. And it includes kind of like a new set of digital economic zones. And so all of this is kind of applications of crypto and kind of computing infrastructure to just upgrading economies and governance systems. Then our third focus area is around AI and robotics. And this comes from us deeply believing that the invention of artificial intelligence and where this is going to go is probably the most important technology that humanity has ever built, and potentially will ever build. In that this is creating this like third knowledge system, potentially giving, sort of creating or giving birth to a new species, which is kind of a very deep, hard thing to kind of do and think about. And it also is about kind of broadly optimizing all of the current kind of economic and social set of systems. And so that means kind of automating production and automating like just kind of everything that kind of that we do. And so we think like that is like a tremendous inflection point. Like certainly we see it now with all of the AI labs and what the latest generation of LLMs can do. But we think that this is very early days in the capability development. And here the best teacher will be kind of the predictions of very thoughtful scientists that have looked at this very deeply over the last 20, 30, 40 years. And sci-fi. I think sci-fi was very early to thinking about the implications of all of this stuff, way ahead of others. And so the writings of people like Turing and von Neumann and others that saw the beginnings of this, to like Moravec and many others that kind of saw where like AI development was going to go eventually. But that also a lot of the sci-fi stories that kind of looked at how humanity was going to come to terms with the creation of a new, artificial intelligence systems and whatnot. And so that whole part is kind of focus area 3. And our fourth focus area, which is our most recent addition, is Neurotech. And so this means being able to blend computing systems with our neural systems. So this means how do you connect brains or neural tissue to computing interfaces through brain-computer interfaces, or how do you digitize neural tissue itself, meaning how do you map the brain itself and be able to represent it digitally to be able to then have kind of like a digital version of humans that might become really important down the road. So this is like early days, but we already have the connectome of a fly. In the next 3 to 5 years, we'll have probably the connectome of a mouse. And eventually we'll have like digital mice running around in a virtual environment, and someday that can include humans too. And that would be like a major development for the species, right? Like that would be like a major leap in the human condition. And so it's unclear exactly when that's going to happen. I sort of expect it to happen sometime in the next 15 to 30 years. Large variance there, but I think it would be very weird if we haven't achieved that, say by like 2070 or 2080 or something like that. And so that's kind of like our fourth focus area. And so over time, PL will keep adding more focus areas because it requires a certain amount of focus on each one of them to be able to enter that area with critical mass and kind of a number of people and so on. And yeah, that's kind of like where and all of this is very opinionated in terms of these are technologies that we think are going to be transformational for the world and for the species and for everybody around us, they tend to have to do with computing as a major lever, and they tend to be technologies that we think have an enormous amount of impact potential.
Okay, wow, there is so much here. There's so many interesting areas. I'm gonna tap into the last one, the Neurotech BCIs. About like a few months ago, I watched the Neuralink update from maybe 6 or 8 months ago, and I was absolutely mind blown by how much is already possible. Like there are people playing video games just with their mind. There is already people who can move their arm just because Neuralink specifically is implanted into their brain. And I feel like, well, maybe that's because it's not the world that I very closely follow. There must be so much more happening that I'm completely unaware of. Tell me more about what is your interest in neurotech? What is your vision for how humans should develop with these devices, and like what's broadly happening in the space?
Great question. So maybe I'll make three strong cases for neurotech. And again, just quick redefinition. This means technologies that interface directly with our neural tissue, and so this means primarily our brain, but also the nervous system, all the way to like actuating our muscles and our proprioception and so on. And there's also a way of applying neurotech and neuroscience insights into building of artificial intelligence and artificial intelligence systems. So the reason we call them neural networks in computer science is very much inspired by the neurons. So like we did the early science of understanding how neurons work, and we built then mathematical models of those, and that's what became the individual neuron and the neural networks, and like the beginning of the AI field. And that's no accident. It's just a super powerful, very general computing system that is able to very flexibly ingest vast amounts of data and sense make on top of this data through some very straightforward learning rules. And so it's a fundamentally very powerful way of building learning systems. In some forms, neurotech has been in use for a long time. I kind of include things like caffeine as a version of neurotech. It's like a small compound.
Because it's a thing that affects your nervous system, and so technically you're injecting something artificial or foreign to your body into your nervous system. That's a very interesting way to, And I guess we're already cyborgs in some way.
Caffeine helps us access, kind of like improve our cognitive performance. But then say, alcohol, which is kind of like very opposing caffeine, is also a form of neurotech, but that's more for like social environments and so on. I tend to like not drink anymore and so on, but like historically our species has been heavy users of alcohol in lots of like social settings and whatnot. And so I think that both of these are like a version of neurotech that kind of changes the human experience and changes the human capabilities. And so I'll make 3 cases for it. So like one case is just straight up from looking at human capabilities and creating a form of repair or treatment for kind of damage or which might be like a result of accidents or a disease of some sort or some other condition where lots of people are affected by some problem that they encountered, whether it's due to an accident, like sometimes people are in some type of accident that gives them like a spinal cord injury and then they lose mobility, or in some cases this might be an ailment like losing. There are a range of diseases that affect or conditions that affect vision or hearing, where people have hearing loss or vision loss, or in some cases, maybe this could also be a genetic condition where a set of people are born without access to some of these systems. And one branch of neurotech is about creating systems that can help people with these conditions to be able to kind of repair or access or kind of like mitigate some of the problems that emerge from those kinds of accidents and so on. One version of this might be like the cochlear implant, which was a way of restoring hearing for a range of people, or again, some of the implants that are restoring mobility, of being able to have a brain-computer interface that then enables you to access a computer, move a cursor or something like that. And that tends to be used quite a bit because computers then can serve as an interface to control other things, right? Like if you can control a cursor in a computer and you can get really good at that, or control a computer that way, then you can probably also control then like a chair, right? And so for somebody that might have a form of paralysis of different types, they can somehow then control kind of robotic systems around them to then regain a form of mobility. And so for a lot of people, this is transformative technology that kind of gives them back forms of agency and forms of capability that they tragically lost. In some cases, very understandably, all of these forms of experience are different and varied, and some people don't want to access these. It should come down to a choice, right? Like at the end of the day, we should be able to use the fruits of science and technology to give people the ability to choose these systems if they want to kind of regain that capability. We already have some neurotech implants that can restore vision. So one of the systems that I'm most excited about is the Prima retinal implant from Science Corp, which is assists people with macular degeneration, which is a form of vision loss, where people develop this kind of dark patch in the focal point of their vision, and then the Prima implant restores some version of their sight. And we'll have next generation versions of all of these kinds of systems. And so it might be restoring senses, it might be restoring mobility, it might be there's other parts of neurotech which might be around better self-regulation. So there's a set of neurotech devices around supporting people with forms of depression or Parkinson's, or there's a whole range of kind of neural disorders that can be greatly assisted by forms of neurotech.
How is it split between a device and actual drug that can affect any of those neural pathways? Or is it just, I understand that it's two very different ways of affecting your brain pathway, but like, is one inherently better than the other? Is it really highly dependent on the disease, quote unquote, that you're treating?
Disorders vary a lot, and the technological interventions have a wide range of impacts. And so there are some cases that you can use. There are some disorders you can treat pharmacologically, meaning like you can develop a drug to target it. Certainly some forms of depression can be treated with different kinds of drugs. And I know that there are a range of medicines for Parkinson's and MS and conditions like that. However, it may also be that and we have evidence of actually physical devices, like an actual implant that can assist people with those kinds of conditions. And then, things like sensory loss or loss of mobility, that comes down to repairing either noticing that there's if you have a spinal cord injury, being able to regain mobility, that comes down to being able to bypass that damaged component. But in many cases, you can't actually use the remainder of the nervous system. You instead have to go and actuate like an exoskeleton or kind of like a robotic chair around you and so on. I am hopeful that we'll actually figure out that we'll do the deep biology work here to actually figure out how to regrow parts of the nervous system that might have been atrophied over time, and to actually be able to restore nervous system. But that'll come probably downstream of many more years of deep understanding of how neural systems develop and how can you like actually regrow them and so on. This is probably deep biology work that needs to happen for a long time.
How far away are we from normal people being implanted with different devices or using the devices to enhance their capabilities?
Well, I was saying that like everybody, like I would. Are you talking about kind of? I think the word normal is like very hard because, and I wouldn't use it because people who just have like a wide variety of experience, and maybe people have like a disorder, but even if you don't have a disorder, you might have like just a wide variance of
that's
perspective.
True. Yeah.
So I would just like
I guess like obvious conditions versus non-obvious conditions that don't really impair your experience as much as someone who doesn't have their sight or doesn't have.
Yes, I think maybe like the term might be So let me maybe get to those two other cases. So kind of like case one is for kind of repairing some disorder. Mm-hmm. Then case two is for kind of expanding or enhancing the human experience. I mentioned caffeine and alcohol before. Those are like enhancements to the human experience, right? People normally, without ingesting caffeine or alcohol, tend to have a particular range of experiences. You add this like piece of neurotech, and then they have like a wider range of experiences, right? Like Van Gogh used to have a range of like, I think, absinthe and other alcohol and whatever. And like, I think it was absinthe, I don't remember. But, a certain set of artists like have used all kinds of pharmacological means to accomplish like incredible forms of art and so on. And like they expanded their human experience and then shared some of that with the rest of the world. So there are ways of kind of expanding what we get to experience. And Neurotech gives us a way of greatly, very broadly expanding those capabilities. So it might be stuff as simple as taking one of our senses and expanding the range of what it can cover. So for example, we kind of usually hear within a very tight, narrow band. What if you could actually hear a much wider band? Or we currently see only a very small part of the light spectrum. What if we could actually see a much wider band? Like what if you could like have infrared vision or that kind of, or have like very eyes that could like actually focus very far into the distance. Or one that like I'm really excited about. What if you could add, another? We normally have where trichromats, where we can like combine three colors to like then generate all over the millions of colors that we see. But there are tetrachromats that have few people in the world have been born with like the ability to like actually combine four color channels that then the colors that they can see are just way more. Like the combinatorics means just a vastly larger number of colors that most people cannot see. So imagine being able to like actually crank that number up and be able to see tons of like your visual experience would get dramatically more interesting.
I find this comparison of neurotech with like drugs or different various enhancements that we can consume to enhance our human experience very interesting, because there is so much more worry about injecting a literal device to your body than there is drinking maybe a glass of water with spikes with something that would still enhance your experience in some way. And I guess it's because people are so worried about constantly having some sort of impact on their psyche versus being affected with some chemical through, I don't know, like the cleaning supplies that we're using or the water that we're drinking. Is just like a very interesting perception dilemma.
Totally. And I think it comes from, and I think it's very natural, and I think it comes from these things haven't been normalized yet. So, there was a point in time when we didn't have organ transplants, and people.
We need to get comfortable with it, yeah.
And there was like a whole like very deep, part of like becoming as a society comfortable with the idea that you would take the organ of another person and transplant it into somebody that needed it, right? And like that's kind of like a initially it was seen as like super crazy, but like now it became clearly broadly beneficial, clearly very impactful, and then society kind of adapted and moved on. And so I tend to see this, the same kind of thing will apply here. In the days before the car, like the world was organized very differently, and like you had these like newfangled machines that arrived that were like horseless carriages, and like what the hell is this thing? And people over time started adapting, and there was a lot of like kind of moral panics and consternation around the arrival of this like mechanized system, and the introduction of a car into a city like started reshaping how it worked and whatnot. So I think a lot of it will come down to the first devices being kind of put out there and kind of normalized. And to be clear, there's already I think tens of thousands of people with cochlear implants today, maybe hundreds of thousands. I don't know the exact figure, but it's a lot of people already have BCIs of some sort. And so this is actually like a lot more normal than people might expect. I do think that there's a wide, eventually I think this will be kind of as normal as something like getting a piercing or something like that, where, today, like, I don't know how many millions of people get piercings or tattoos or something like that, or buy one of these like pocket supercomputers.
Yeah.
And so it's just we haven't quite figured out the really easy ways of creating a form factor that then actually starts getting implanted and connected to our nervous system. But once we figure out how to do that really well, then like this will become much more normal. And the good news here is that there are a number of teams. So maybe Neuralink is the most visible, but there are 10, 20 BCI companies that are developing technologies now, many of which are in late stages of clinical trials that will kind of arrive and become like strong products. Again, initially, most of them are targeting these medical applications, these kind of sensory or motor repair conditions. But these other cases around kind of enhancing the human experience, I think are even more broadly applicable, meaning like I think by number, many more people are going to want these. It's just kind of a market that doesn't quite exist yet, and so people aren't like really asking for it. But when you talk to most people and you say, "Hey, would you want to be able to like see better?
Yeah.
Like, would you want to be able to like have further reaching vision? Would you be able to see like additional colors?
Yeah.
Would you be able to want to hear additional bands of hearing? Would you want to be able to taste more tastes?" Like most people are like, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. The hard question is like, okay, but how? And then the question becomes, how safe can we make the products? How easy can we make the product deployment? What is the whole life cycle of the product? What does it mean to get one of these? For example, I strongly think that these systems should be able to be implanted and removed and upgraded. And so you have to think of like the entire life cycle of a generation of the technology. What does it mean to get it and upgrade it over time? And so on. So this kind of like the kind of enhancement of the human experience piece. One piece of that will be also think of how we relate and communicate with each other. So there's really cool sci-fi that's been written around this of like how, if you have these systems, they're able to then convey our thinking and it can become another form of communication. So it may not just be translating our neural patterns into speech, but it might be also being able to transmit our neural patterns to each other. So there's good sci-fi written about what happens when you like start being able to like telepathically communicate with each other, where you're able to share entire like visions of the world, like walk into the same dream or the same imagination, or like that is just kind of imagine like the human experience expansion that can happen.
Yeah, that's wild.
Between like friends and couples and partners and family. Or being able to like relive memories together, like in full rich, 8K with like all the smells and tastes and so on. Like being able to imagine something together, just kind of what becomes possible once we kind of connect our brains to some computational medium that can then transfer that communication between us. Is just kind of incredibly phenomenal and fantastic. And so that's kind of like all category 2. And then the third case I will make is around kind of computing and digital systems and artificial intelligence, which is that because we're making these artificial neural nets that are becoming so capable and powerful, and we're building intelligent systems that are now more capable than many humans at many things, right? So we have this concept of jagged intelligence where the AI systems of today greatly exceed humans, like they're broadly superhuman at a number of cognitive things. Not everything yet, but that will come with time. That raises a very deep, hard question for ourselves, for humanity, which is, what is our future going to be? Like, where are we going to be 20, 50, 100, 200 years from now? Our biological history has been that we, over a million years, in the last million years, we kind of became the apex species in the world, where we, thanks to our intelligence, our ability to coordinate, and our ability to create technology, we kind of gained control of the planet. For better or worse, right? For better in terms of all of the great living experience we've been able to give billions of people that otherwise wouldn't have happened, and like the amazing works of art and the amazing works of the human experience is just so incredibly rich with like broadly beneficial things, and for worse, in that in the meantime we've also kind of made a bit of a mess on the planet. We've managed to kind of broadly harm many other species. We've hunted many to extinction. We've broadly decreased the amount of wildlife that there actually is. A set of species have benefited, right? So like the species that are livestock or pets have broadly benefited, right? So now there's like way more cows and sheep and dogs and cats than there ever were before, thanks to like this like symbiotic relationship. But in the meantime, like the polar bears are not doing great, and so we have to come to terms with that and kind of figure out like a good path for the future. But this also raises this deep question of, if we're creating this entity or set of entities that are artificially intelligent, and they are going to be more intelligent than humanity, what does that mean for us? Are these systems just going to be tools, or are they going to be agents, or are they going to be beings with their own volition and their own perspective and their own ego and their own identity? And that becomes creating a new species. And if we do that, knowing that they're going to be much more intelligent and capable than we are, what sort of relationship are we creating? Are we kind of giving birth to our descendants, or like our children, so to speak? Like the children of humanity is like the digital beings. And are we going to just kind of cede control of the future to them? Or is there some middle ground? Can we create a path by which humanity can also benefit from digital evolution, that humanity can also benefit from the fact that like this, third knowledge system, like the digital knowledge system, can be broadly super intelligent and can be broadly incredibly capable? Can we bring humanity along, so to speak, with that new digital set of beings? And so from my perspective, we have done the scientific thinking. We've done a lot of the grounding on the fact that at the end of the day, what we know about humanity is that we have physical, organic brain, neural tissue, and that's where our consciousness emerges. And if we can connect that to computing systems, or we can digitize that neural tissue and that brain and represent it inside of a computer, then that digital brain would also be conscious and would also have the same kind of experience. This is not a given yet. We haven't done the hard scientific questions of understanding what consciousness actually is, but we're dramatically closer to that than ever before. And again, here there's good sci-fi that talks about the possibility landscape of being able to have digital humans, and then having the ability to like snapshot yourself, and like you're you don't have to die if you don't want to, or like you don't have to age, or you can like refactor yourself, or you can improve yourself.
What's your definition of what consciousness is, or what's your hunch to what consciousness is?
So to me, our conscious experience is an emergent phenomenon, an emergent process that happens as a result of the type of information processing that our brains have to do. We have to ingest a wide range of sensory input that represents updates on the world and what's happening, and we have to create a robust and deep understanding of what is going on to be able to make good decisions. And we have to make good decisions in a complex environment that includes social relationships to many other people and many other animals. And those social relationships require forms of identity and forms of individual decision making that preserve your life. Like you have to make decisions that are good for you, and you're not gonna accidentally kill yourself really easily. And so those are like the basic building blocks upon which you can form an ego and form an individual identity and form a self-aware, conscious perspective. And I think that this will come down to very concrete functional units of kind of awareness and awareness of your self-awareness and awareness of your self-awareness of your self-awareness. There's kind of like a recursive structure here. And it'll turn out that we have this kind of very functional way of describing how consciousness can emerge. And this is a consequence of the information processing that must happen and the decision-making loop that we have of how we control ourselves, how we actuate, how we move, how we talk. We have to pick the next action to do. And that has to be done with deep context of everything that has happened to us in our lifetime and all of our deep relationships that we have with other people. And so that gives rise to our conscious aware experience. And if you take that information system and you replicate it in a different environment, that system will also be conscious in the same kind of way. We'll have the same kind of trace of experiences and trace of knowledge and whatnot. So this kind of third case for neurotech is, can we kind of not just enhance the human condition, but can we kind of preserve humanity into the future? Can we give humanity the benefits of digital evolution, and can we kind of avoid this potential conflict with the digital beings that we're about to create by creating some kind of merger in between of being able to kind of co-evolve with AI systems and kind of grow together into the future?
But wouldn't you argue that in some ways AI, digital creatures, and say uploaded intelligence, so humanity uploading itself into the cloud with the same set of experiences, the same level of consciousness, is kind of still AI digital systems, because AI systems were trained on human knowledge and would probably, at least right now, they're evolving similar or thinking or giving us an impression that they're thinking similarly to humans? Where would the difference lie? Because if we do go down the route of uploaded intelligence, what should humanity do on Earth, when people kind of die in their physical shape or form and then be in this digital world?
Yeah, so lots of great questions there. So I would say first, we do have, because we're training LLMs on our textual and kind of audiovisual outputs, digital representations of all of those, we do have a collection of AI minds that are fairly close to ours. This didn't have to be. If we had built artificial intelligence using kind of the game playing methods that built AlphaGo or AlphaZero, or many other kinds of kind of historically described kind of approaches to building artificial intelligence, we could have ended with very different minds that kind of were more much more alien to our brains. I think thankfully, because we're training the current swath of LLMs on our kind of outputs and our cultural outputs, then the space of those minds is actually relatively close. However, that doesn't say that the future ones are going to remain that close. That probably, some kind of form of evolution will take over, and they'll kind of grow and develop in their own ways. And so they'll probably differentiate from us. If you think ahead 10, 20, 50, 100 years from now, 200 years from now, there's a very, significant kind of evolutionary pressure that will emerge. Just think that, 10, 15 years ago, these neural nets were barely recognizing objects in an image and recognizing faces. And now they're composing symphonies and composing sophisticated plans and giving, kind of helping you think and giving you advice on problems. And, in many cases, doing people's work for them, they're already kind of incredibly capable.
Much more capable than most people.
I would say more capable than most people at most cognitive tasks.
Yeah, exactly. There
are still many cognitive tasks that many people still beat LLMs at. but it's not
we're
clear
so
how
close
long that'll
to,
take.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
to that not longer being. I think I've already kind of given up that AI is much better than me at a lot
Probably
of
out of set
different
of things, and so you have to like retreat to like the things that
Yeah.
you're really good at uniquely. Yeah. So that's true. But then like, this does create this environment where we're creating these digital beings that are just going to have a much larger, richer experience than humanity is going to have. And what does that mean for humanity? Like that's not necessarily like, maybe it's great for them, but like what about
Not a
us,
good thing
right?
for
And
us,
so
yeah.
like from that perspective, I see Neurotech as a way to enable humans to kind of go along in that journey and being part of that future. And so having a path to kind of digitizing and uploading human minds gives you something closer. It's also a question of what's going to lead to broadly more beneficial future. I think that there are very concrete, real kind of AI risk sort of reasons why uploaded human brains, uploaded humans might be a more ethical and more beneficial species, because we already have very clear cultural ethical tendencies. As bad as humans can be about a range of things, we're also quite good at we tend to be like very hard on ourselves, and we have great capacity for compassion and great capacity for moral perspective and moral judgment and so on. And we already have like evidence of being in a point in the spectrum. And if we create like fully artificial systems, it's not entirely a given that they will necessarily be more ethical than we are. I've been very pleasantly surprised by the latest models. I think like, GPT-4, GPT-5, the last two Claudes, like these systems do convey a depth of moral judgment ability that is quite good. But it's not clear to me how much of that is just knowledge and understanding versus their own deep intrinsic motivations. That is very difficult to do right now. You basically have to do like LLM psychology to try and understand what is just something that they say they think versus what do they really think. And so there's kind of like a deep kind of broadly beneficial future for everybody case for kind of like uploading humanity alongside creating these new digital beings. And you asked a very key question, which is kind of like what happens to so if we do that, then kind of what happens to biological humanity, how much of that is around, and so on. These are like super hard questions that we are going to encounter culturally as a species over the next few decades. These will become some of the key questions we have for ourselves. One easy answer to a lot of this can become like, hey, digital beings don't really need, the Earth. Like digital beings can totally like take the asteroid belt or like take Mercury and build a Dyson sphere next to the sun. And so you can totally come up with like a good kind of division of environments that could work out. This is kind of like, also discussed in sci-fi in very different points. I think the cultural series kind of talks about kind of like biological humans and kind of uploaded or like digital cyborg type humans and fully digital intelligences as like three different kind of branches of humanity plus AI. That's a possible landscape. It's not really clear what is kind of gonna work long term. A lot of this just comes down to human agency and what people choose to do, right? Like it really has to come down to what each individual person wants to do for themselves and and what their communities want to do and so on. There's a recent sci-fi that I think is extremely good called Pantheon. Yeah, that I highly recommend because it deals,
it was super interesting.
It deals with a ton of these questions, right? And
I thought one of the most important one of the questions that really stood out to me was the one about us like not really graduating from childhood because our parents are still around. So like psychologically, you're never really entering adulthood. And I was like, oh, so maybe the psychology of these uploaded humans is really going to change because there is the intellectual perception of the world, and then there is the complicated emotional perception of the world, which I don't think we fully understand yet. So is that like going to evolve as the technological systems are going to evolve, or how are we going to adapt to that? And that I think in that way we're going to become very different species.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think humans are very adaptable culturally, and so I wouldn't worry too much about any one of these types of questions because things will be different, but the only constant is change. If you think about our life today and what we do, it's just so different than what people did 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, 100,000, a million years ago, right? And so, we're like in the middle of New York in like an island of skyscrapers and buildings, and like, we have, clean drinking water, and we're talking to these microphones that are like all electricity
Neurotech
powered.
enhancements in the form of caffeine.
Like this is just already, we are a totally different species than people were 1,000 years ago. It's just like our biological evolution hasn't changed that much, and therefore, because it operates just much slower. And so probably a lot of our instincts and drives and so on are similar. But what we do on a day-to-day basis and what we care about is just broadly very different. Just think about, world before books, like, and before stories were written down, and like, just think about like the human experience back then. That's not to say that it couldn't find amazing fulfillment in a ton of ways and tell stories and like have like broadly great fulfilling lives. But it's just very different, right? Like, it's just like a different slice of experience. And I find the world of today where you can, if you want, you can go to the jungle and have, a life away from society, or a life with a small group that is very different. Like, there's people in the Sentinel Islands today living like Paleolithic humans. You can go do that too, right? Like you and a group of people could go do that if you wanted to. It's difficult, but like it is possible. And you have agency over that choice. And at the same time, you can choose not to do that. And you can choose to, sit in a room with like incredible books and, incredible music, and write books or write music, or like paint, or, build a building or whatever. And like you have like this kind of other very rich life that you can access. Now imagine the future and like vault into what will be possible for us to do 100, 1,000, 10,000 years from now. And that, possibility space is just so much larger than what we do today that it just seems like incredibly exciting to be able to access that.
So speaking of the future, of a shorter term future, not thousands of years from now, what are your predictions for humanity 10 and 15 years from now?
I don't think a ton is going to change in 10 years. So, we're in 2025 now, 2035. So I'll make a few guesses here, and I will preface this by saying these guesses are well-informed guesses, but the probability distributions are quite wide. And so some of these things might, vary by 5 or 10 years. And so I would say like 10 years from now, we'll probably have already achieved and broadly recognized that we have, full AGI capable systems, and not just like in this jagged intelligence perspective, but we should have in 10 years systems that kind of like are just vastly superhuman across all, if not just almost all tasks. We might have super intelligence. I think that is within the time frame. I would kind of think that it is very likely that we have super intelligence. So that means recursive self-improvement to be able to create a vastly superhuman set of AI systems that are able to think well beyond what humanity thinks about today. We should have by that point some version of digital societies. The form factor that we have today for AI systems is one where you have many different agents, like, hundreds of thousands of separate agents, all kind of trained from base models, but having a different experience and different interactions. So that should be able to be connected to kind of like a digital city in a sense, or like a digital kind of experience. There's a real question as to whether or not we're going to build these systems with kind of a long-lived experience, or whether we're going to, for safety reasons, be kind of inhibiting that. And so there's like a deep kind of hard ethical question, both for humanity and for these systems, as to whether or not you give them initially the ability to like have like longer-lived identities and longer-lived senses of self. There's clear like reasons why you shouldn't do that, but also clear reasons that you should. Otherwise, these systems are kind of like coming into existence and dissipating like very quickly, and it's not like, it's kind of like a very different form of identity. We should have by 2035, I would say like tens or hundreds of millions of robots, like humanoids. I think, this could go very quickly. By 2030, I think we should probably have like hundreds of thousands to low millions. We will definitely have, by 2035, have solved like the core mobility challenges for humanoid robots and like the dog style robots and so on. So we should be kind of like well into lots of robotics production. In this sense, actually, the iRobot movie actually got it quite right in the timeline. Like it sort of predicted like the humanoid robot stream right around kind of the early 2030s. We should have, hopefully, we will have massively scaled solar energy, and so we should be greatly decreasing CO2 emissions by that point. Like especially like China keeps growing the way it is in solar and nuclear. And if the US kind of picks up the pace too. And so that means that we should be well into avoiding like the worst effects of climate change. We might still have some like very bad outcomes, and we might still have some of those horrible heat waves that might kill hundreds of thousands of people or something like that. That would be great if we can avoid that. But I think hopefully like we'll be in a much better spot there. I think we should have by 2035, so 10 years from now, much better neurotech that then kind of restores a number of these senses like I was describing. Like we should probably have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people with BCI implants that recover and repair some amount of sensory and mobility conditions. And hopefully, I'm not 100% sure about this, but hopefully we will have kind of the consumer use cases starting to develop. It would be amazing if we could have like tens of thousands or millions of people already using these implants for that kind of connectivity. That might lag a little bit more than 10 years, but not much more. I don't think we will have, it's possible we will have unlocked automated production of certain types of things. So it could be that we have much more automated production of cars and computers and like a lot of these kinds of devices. Maybe some amount, once we have humanoids, we might be able to automate more construction of like housing and material and so on. And so maybe we can greatly decrease the cost of housing production. We should be able to like have much more abundance in terms of the broad, basic goods living. I think we'll face some like very serious hard questions around what does the automation of production mean for people at large? Meaning, today those are automation tools potentially will lead to this kind of separation of capital and labor, and our current world order relies on a very strong coupling of capital and labor. And so I do think that like we need to come up with some other economic structure that enables humans broadly to have access to the fruits and benefits of all of this capital growth that we'll have. And so this is where things like, some form of like public goods production and building and so on is really needed. And I think we need better economic models and better economic systems. So we have to kind of like do that work fairly quickly. But I think we'll be in the early innings of that. I don't think we'll be in suddenly there are hundreds of millions of people without jobs. It's rather like, I think there'll be like millions of people that are displaced and have to relearn things fairly quickly. But it'll start being like, start hitting that. I think in 10 years, we probably won't have a human upload, but we will probably should have, I mean, maybe we do. I hope that we do, but it's more likely that we'll have suddenly a mouse, maybe a dog already kind of like running around in a virtual environment. And we should have, hopefully we'll have like much more secure systems for like broad communication and whatnot. Like I don't know where like there's kind of deep geopolitical questions that we're going to go into in terms of the US and China and like kind of the geopolitical economic tensions between them that hopefully don't boil over into some kind of conflict by that point. But that's kind of where I think we'll be like 10 years from now. So now for 50 years, it's way harder to predict because this is kind of like past, the predictions around the singularity, which really just means that the volatility of how these different things will intersect is so high that you lose the ability to predict many things. So I would say that maybe the way that I'll approach this is that I'll say a range of things that will have already become very possible. It's not clear that necessarily that will happen because it's very path dependent. But I think 50 years from now, which is 2075, we should have had the ability to like upload millions of people. We should have had, broadly artificially super intelligent systems. We will have gone through the big questions around what humans and AI systems are going to do together and whether they're going to co-evolve or speciate or differentiate. We should have already gone through the big geopolitical tensions between the US and China. It's not clear kind of like what the outcomes of that will be. We should have like broad energy abundance by that point, like either through solar or nuclear, or like some combination of the two. We should be well into like robotic production and automation of most like systems, and so that like everything to satisfy the human condition in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of like the lower layers of that, of like access to shelter and access to food and access to like all of the material needs should be well kind of covered or be able to be well covered. Hopefully by that point we'll have kind of built up better economic systems and better economic models. We should have by that point millions of digital beings, potentially actually it's 2075. It could be billions or trillions of digital beings. And whether those will be on Earth or on, we'll start building the Dyson sphere or what, like we can probably be kind of well into that by that point. Hopefully there will be a Mars colony. It's not clear to me that that'll make a ton of sense if you can go to the Dyson sphere instead. But it's kind of like a cool thing to achieve anyway. So maybe we should do it anyway. And I do think that like hopefully we'll have this, much richer kind of experience of life that I was describing before, of like we'll have gone through that in like a few decades of kind of like broadly enhancing our senses and our experience and be able to like create new forms of art. And like, think of, the forms of art of today are greatly intertwined with technology. We have like the technology of making paintings and making movies and making music and so on. So as we unlock new technological capabilities, that'll create many new forms of art. And so like that could be fantastically interesting and cool to experience. And I think hopefully by that point we might have kind of like new like broadly we'll probably have solved a ton of deep hard questions about science questions around the universe and the nature of reality. And hopefully by that point, we'll have figured out what consciousness is and how it emerges. We hopefully will have grown up and built much better ethical frameworks. Hopefully we'll have, stopped our encroachment upon the lives of many other species on the planet and like be on the road to like more recovery there. And so, yeah, I think it could be like a tremendously positive potential future 50 years from now. It's not that long. Yeah.
That's true. It's so true that it's also path dependent, because if we were doing these predictions in the 70s, we'd be like, oh, our physical world will look so different than it is right now. But hopefully we'll be watching this video 50 years from now being uploaded into the cloud. So we'll see. It'd be interesting to watch it then.
Yeah. 1900 to 1950, like if you run the kind of like if you did that from like looking at the world in 1900 and make predictions for like what the world in 1950 would have looked like, or 1910 to 1960, like, yeah, you get like these wild changes.
And to close it out, for the physical world of today, what's bringing you joy these days?
Oh, a ton of things. So probably just the most important, I got married earlier this year, and that was like just a phenomenal thing for me and my wife. And I get a ton of personal joy out of kind of thinking about all these things and working with people and playing together and like creating together. I love reading and listening to sci-fi and different stories and fiction, and I now love various different forms of working out that are new to me. Like I got really into weightlifting, and like that's been really fun. Got really into sauna culture and cold plunging and so on. Like that's been like super, super, super fun. I get to talk to a lot of amazing people. And so that's been like wonderfully fun.
Juan, thank you so much for your time. This was really fun, and we could have gone into so many different directions. Thank you for, sharing your perspectives about the future with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, super fun that you're doing this.